Yeah, well, that's part of, you know, what I'm working with like a local design firm, like on artwork and stuff like that. They're a
Zero voice.
small, well,
This time we were just talking about it.
they're basically,
We had a one-on-one and we didn't even get to.
one of the two, and the other guy has been all the time. But yeah, the whole like, kind of cultural side, you know, since I'm new, I'm old people.
Sure.
So like,
Forward
did a tour of Beyond Palace. You know,
I think it's a different company.
friends that
It's
do
just
some
a lot of
interviews
people, a lot of geeks.
some of the people who, you know,
But it's a nice one.
sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, basically like historians or just experts in the field.
Font.
It does, yeah.
Another example from IP potential.
So we've got this live stream right there. So it's going out to the other teams that are in the building. So the ones that weren't there are going to get here. All over the island,
Wi-Fi thing. Is there like Wi-Fi?
Yes, the Wi-Fi is there, so I think it's, yeah, so that's the, yeah.
Her teammate actually lives in Seattle. Yeah. No, but they all tune in, and there's a couple of people watching from Indonesia. Yeah.
Right.
So that would be -6. Not too bad.
Yeah.
Not too bad. Yeah, noon time.
Yeah, exactly.
Indonesia.
Yeah. But they're really interesting. That team is.
That's really cool.
Have you seen the Netflix Bandersnatch? It's the spin from Black Mirror.
No.
So there's so Black Mirror, a TV show, it's about kind of like the implications of technology on society. Just in like a really dark way. Made this thing called Bandersnatch, and it's an interactive film where you can actually sort of choose your story, you can choose your path. So you can sit in the life of a young person who is starting his career in game development. And he's making all these decisions and stuff, and so you get to make them for him, so the movie can conclude in 20 minutes. And if you decide to end his life, the movie can conclude in 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
So it's
Really cool.
yeah. But they're doing that. They're doing it for the international development process.
Yeah.
So telling stories about refugees. Yeah. Yeah.
I think
And then I just, oh, like,
Yeah.
so like that.
So drag it down.
There have to be too much
other people who know.
So this is like
spend a lot of money. Sometimes
That's fun.
unintended consequences.
Yeah. Well, there was an essay about that. It was before the 3 Cups of Tea, or maybe it was after the 3 Cups of Tea, and that sort of started making. Naomi, are we ready to go on the live stream?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Is it live?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Rachel, you coming? Okay. We have the door. Is it cool? Or? Oh.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
People will probably trickle in a little bit against the traffic and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, guys, I want to introduce you to David I, or I guess Dr. David I. But anyways, David, he runs OTED, or the Office of Technology Transfer and Economic Development at UH, and he used to head up Hitachis VC arm in Asia. You can sort of go through your credentials and stuff, but I thought what we can start with, rather than going through the list of David's credentials, if you guys wouldn't mind sharing about the projects that you're working on, so that you can get an idea for what we are about with Purple Prize. Maybe we can start somewhere in the middle, since I know that the further we go out that end, then we enter the non-Purple Prize territory. We're really happy to have you. This is Eric, by the way. You can introduce yourself. And then the further we go this way, then we have people who are in the connections phase, who are over here as observers for today's event. So it's super awesome. And then Rayshon, he runs this place, which is even cooler because he let us use this space for free. So you guys are on the same team. You guys want to start?
Yeah, we'll start. I'm Joey. This is Marty. We're with Alvizio Project, and our organization is about kinds of uses. So far, we built a prototype, full-scale housing prototype at UH Manila, and that has proven substantial potential for where it can be used.
Cool. Thank you. That's all right.
I'm like, where's that survey?
Oh.
So I'm Lauren Rothbano. I have a company called 3R Water, and we are building basically climate adaptation tools to build resiliency in communities. So we have a product called Follow the Drop. And Follow the Drop identifies where stormwater is being generated on the property, and then quantifies what the user quantifies how much stormwater runoff is being generated, and the app will help guide the user the optimum size rain garden or catchment tank, and they can put whatever they want in. It'll show the runoff reduction. And then there's sort of then the admin view that could be a city or utility that could be viewing all of the user's data to basically monitor where stormwater is being generated in green infrastructure projects.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Sheila Bukajar, part of the connections phase with an application that was about social-emotional intelligence in the education space, helping teachers to do more of it, more performance assessments.
But now?
Okay. But now I'm in the connection phase. I met Stephen Smith, Kaana Solutions, and so I'm working with him, and I'm helping him to do all of his operations for educational programs out at HTA for now. So our first prototype starts in a couple of weeks.
Super. That was really cool.
Yeah,
Connection.
yeah, it was kind of neat that happened. Hi, I'm Ruby, and I was in the connections phase. I have an inmate art project called the Correctional Arts Reentry Program, or CARE. We work with incarcerated artists, and we market and sell their artwork so that they can earn money for their transition back to the community. And during the connections phase, I was challenged to come up with some type of technology that could integrate with this. And so where I landed was to integrate augmented reality with the art, so that when people are viewing the art, then they would actually have a multi-sensory experience through augmented reality, like through their phones or tablets or whatever they're viewing it through. So I'm in the process. I didn't make it to the building phase, but I'm still actively involved with Purple Prize, and I'm in the process of working that whole technology stack out, and it's kind of on me, so I have a huge learning curve to go. So anybody in the AR, help me out.
But that technology piece does not really apply to only the incarcerated population, right?
Oh, I mean,
That's
it
for
could be for
any
any art,
any
art,
kind of-
any
yeah.
kind of art,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of artists now that are playing around with the whole AR layer. Museums are trying to do
Right.
it, so, but we want to be the first on Oahu, so.
Very cool.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have her,
Yeah.
have her around.
Yeah.
And Ruby's actually going back to your alma mater over to Stanford
Oh,
in
really?
a couple of weeks.
Ah.
Or a couple in a month.
Yeah, next month. I'm studying with Dr. BJ Fogg, who has the Behavior Design Lab. It used to be the Persuasion Tech Lab,
Okay.
and so I've been studying with him and mentoring with him.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks.
My name is Rachel Fujihira. I'm with Box Jelly, and we do co-working spaces. So we build physical places and communities within them. And we manage this space here. We have another space in Kakako, another one in Kakao we're working on. So we like this neighborhood. Thank you.
Left of Alpecia team.
Hi, aloha.
Hi.
I'm Livia. I'm a team of two. My partner is YouTube streaming in, but we're developing we're creating an app called Aina Finda, which leverages or harnesses the power of artificial intelligence to help normalize Iki Hawaii Hawaiian culture and a lot of Hawaii Hawaiian language.
Very nice.
Yep.
Either way.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
My name's Eric Johnson. I'm working out of Ray Chung's Box Jelly space, and I'm working to start a company that will be an apparel and goods brand that is designing products specifically interested in, as I start off with this company, learning more about my team.
Cool. Hello, hi. I'm Kiana Bright. I'm a part of the team of 3 from Mana Studios. So we create a platform that that can create the language learning materials. And for the building phase purposes, we just want to focus on interactive books that people can go in and can create interactive books where they can have Hawaiian language and then the children can learn the language. And also we want to be able to translate the movies on Netflix. And then in the future, maybe YouTube videos and things like that is come from the same platform. And I think this class is going to be very helpful for us.
Very ambitious, but it sounds really exciting.
I'm Jimmy Freeze, my partner Matthew, and they're streaming in. We're called Pelagics, and we basically count fish. We're working with the fisheries over here, online fisheries, pelagic fisheries, to do electronic monitoring of how many fish come in a boat and basically make our fishery sustainable. So we do fish identification, use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and image classification to look at what kind of fish are coming in. We count them, and it does a lot better job than human beings.
Wow. So certainly a different kind of challenge, but really
So
fascinating.
far not simple, but
Yeah.
just little problems. People in front of cameras getting in the way.
Yeah.
Get out of the way.
All right.
I think last but not least, do you want to introduce yourself? Or you could both introduce yourselves.
Aloha. My name is Naomi, part of the Purple Prize team. So we're documenting, and you guys are on live stream right now, just to let you know. But if you miss anything tonight, we are archiving, so you can head back to YouTube and dig in there too. Yeah.
My name is Elena. I'm helping, I'm a Purple Prize Nalakai Fellow, and I'm helping, I'm shadowing under Studio Moya.
Really nice.
And she just got done with Nolakai's camp over on the Big Island, 10-day startup camp. And she built, I think you want to share.
Oh, about our company? So we're Remedy. We're a team of 5, and we're an app that is like a positive, safe space for teenagers or anybody to go. Because social media is becoming really negative, and actually studies have shown that when you're sad and you go on social media, it doesn't make you happier, but it makes you even more sad. So we just want to be that place that people can go when they're sad, and recommending like music and mindfulness and other positive things to help you cope with.
This is so cool.
I need that.
Yeah, oh, sign me up.
Yeah, no, we're super lucky to have the fellows and stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then we also have a lot of several other parties joining us online.
Yeah, there's several others. We've got 12 teams in the building phase alone, and then we have 3 teams that are in UH's research and innovation category of the prize. So that was something that we worked with your office for.
Yep.
They're working on really interesting things too. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can share about them.
Yep.
But anyways, I don't want to take up any more of your time. And,
No problem. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Alec. When Alec told me that he was looking for someone to talk about IT strategy, I said, hey, sure. It's a very familiar topic, and partly because I've gone through this stuff, not only as a professionally trained lawyer, but also as a practitioner. My personal background, I have a rather mixed education background. Does it even list? No, it doesn't list my undergrad. My undergrad degree was in psychology. So then I switched in graduate school to computer science. And then how many years, like 8 or 9 years later, I switched again to business. I went to Stanford, GSB, became my MBA, and a long time ago. And then I worked for many, many years, and then I got interested in law, so I got a law degree as well. And throughout the years, I've been a technologist, technology development. Early in my early career days, And then after Stanford Business School, I switched to the business side and did marketing jobs, marketing, from individual contributor to director of marketing to VP of marketing, and then ultimately did several startups, being the CEO, co-founder several times, and then switching to venture capital investments, and did that for 6 years in Silicon Valley. But I did invest in actually in Israel and also in China and in the US. And so my entrepreneurial experiences span, from Silicon Valley to Utah to China a couple of times. Company size from a tiny little startup where we had to buy used furniture or brand new furniture but yet to be assembled. So I assembled several of these desks. So, all the way to a large company, large corporation executives. So I have experience with different sizes of organizations. And therefore, even before I went to law school, I really got the understanding of what a lot of normal clients really need in the space of intellectual property. And I was lucky to get into Santa Clara University Law School, which is very famous for IP law. It's consistently ranked one of the top 10, most of the time number 5 in the country for IP law, because it's smack in the middle of Silicon Valley, so it's very natural. And therefore, my own personal experience is all the way around the table of innovation. So I've been an innovator myself, manager of innovators, promoter, marketeer, general manager, and investor. I also have my own patent. I have a U.S. patent which I filed in 2009. So, and therefore I hope that through today's talk we can talk about real life issues, and also from more of a strategic angle, not just bits and pieces, but also, especially in the very last 2 slides, I hope to generate some idea in terms of what, from my personal perspective, I think a lot of people are missing, including a lot of IP attorneys. And certainly most of the clients, most of the IP attorney clients typically only look at IP from a very flat or 2-dimensional view. And you really need to start thinking about a more strategic view of IP and forming a more integrated approach about IP protection. But we'll get there. Okay. First,
I have one question. Are you gonna make the slides available? Just so I need to know
I don't care.
How much intellectual property?
I don't care. I mean, all of this is
Otherwise I need
donated to humanity.
So, do you want to borrow my?
I mean, that's what I was just asking. I won't. I'll just pay attention.
Okay.
And there are certainly, when people think of IP, typically people think, oh, that means patents, and because you hear a lot about patents for good reason. Patents are typically worth a lot of money, especially you hear some of the billion-dollar lawsuit cases. One large company against another, Samsung versus Apple, Apple versus Xerox years and years ago. Anyway, but we also need to remember these days copyright, especially computer software, is copyright protected. So how are they generated and how do you protect them? Copyrightable materials like photos, painting, artwork, no matter who does it. Music, movies, books, all kinds of stuff. Plants can be protected. If you have actually formed a new species or you figured out a new way of doing some neat tricks with plants, that's a whole new category. Okay. Designs, you can actually get design patents. They're not as strong as traditional patents, we'll get there. But nevertheless, it's rather useful, especially if you're in a fast developing fashion world, where every year there you have a lot of new designs, and you probably should pay some attention to design patents. Trademarks, almost all businesses will want to have some kind of a name that people will remember you by. Okay, so trademarks will be rather useful. Even if you're not interested in suing other people over trademark infringement, at the very least you need to know how you will not end up infringing someone else's trademark and then dragged into court, right? So even as a defensive driver, you need to understand the rules of the traffic in order to stay out of trouble. And there are also some practical tips I hope to share with you in terms of trademarks, because I've seen really wasteful, sometimes very misguided strategy when it comes to trademarks. And then there's this trade secrets, which is actually informal. So typically people don't go to a IP lawyer asking about trade secrets, but it's actually very important. Again, we'll cover that as well. Okay. First thing, patents. These slides have a little bit color scheme, so in the same category I try to maintain the same background color. So patents, we get a sort of light blue background. Anyway, patents are a negative right. What does that mean? What's a positive right? Well, positive right means that you can do something to other people, and you can actually demand that they do something for you. Patents are rather negative. Negative meaning you can only prevent other people from using your invention. By itself, if it just sits on the shelf, a patent is worth absolutely nothing. Okay, a patent gives you a piece of paper that says you are the original inventor of this great, wonderful breakthrough in technology. But then, well, like I said, it could sit on the shelf doing absolutely nothing. When it's useful is when you find other people using your technology without your permission or without your license. That's when you start calculating, I wonder how much money they should owe me, okay? So, in other words, this is almost like a game of raising piglets. If they're really small and young piglets eating your, infringing, nibbling your food around the edge of your little farm, you probably don't want to go to the owner of those piglets because they're too small. Yeah, who cares? But when they get really big and fat and worth something, so when your infringers actually start shipping products based on your infringed technology and they're shipping millions of copies, that's when you say, great, I love you guys. Because guess what? Now, if you take them to court, they're in deep trouble. Because you do the math. Every single copy, they should owe you the normal market rate of your licensing revenue, right? Your licensing percentage royalty, it's called. On top of that, if they refuse to pay, you could even go to the court and say, Your Honor, this is so unfair. If they keep doing this, it will create irreparable, not reversible damage to me financially. And therefore, I want to apply so-called injunction. I want to stop them from shipping this product. And if you do that, you're no longer talking about how many dollars or cents you could collect from them. The business is kind of dead in the water, okay? And that's when usually they will get much more serious about it and willing to sit down to negotiate a reasonable outcome. So typically a infringement lawsuit in a good case should lead to actually business partnership relationship. So it sounds really funny, in order to make someone your boyfriend or girlfriend, you should sue them first. Okay, but that's how kind of a twisted lawyer's thinking can be. Yes, indeed, and that's what's happening every single day. So remember this, there are some issues that if the infringement or the infringer is a nonprofit organization, they're not using this technology for any commercial purposes, or like I said, they're in such an early stage, they're only prototyping something, they're not making any money. Well, in general, no damages, no lawsuit. Well, you can try, but in the end, the court will award you damage award $1 US. Can't even pay for this bottled water, you know. So you will get absolutely just an empty, very empty victory. So most of the lawyers would, the very first thing they will want to know is how much potential damages are we talking about? Okay, so IP courts are not particularly useful for you to win some moral victory. You know, some people insist on getting that. That's fine if you have a lot of money and you have nothing else better to do with your life. But you know, otherwise, it's really a matter of dollars and cents. You need to do the calculation. If other people are only infringing your technology because they're still tinkering something, they're using your technology in the lab, doing experiments, that may count as infringement, but you know, you can't really get much money out of that. So often people would ask the question, who's a patentee or invention or inventor or co-inventor, and who's an owner? These are two different concepts. Now, in the US in particular, only natural persons, like all of us, can be inventors. Okay, so I can have a commercial enterprise, and that company cannot own any patent. I'm sorry, can own the patent, cannot be the inventor. Only natural people, natural persons, can invent things. And therefore, who's an inventor? One person that has materially contributed to at least one claim. In a typical, if you open up, just go to Google, write down patent, and then any kind of a subject matter you want, chemistry, biology, or whatever, you can see Google has a very good search engine, lists all kinds of patents. If you open up any patent, you will see that initially it's a brief abstract, and then followed by the so-called specification, or the general, description of your patent or patent application, and then in the end there's a, sometimes a not very long section called claims. The claims are the most important part of a patent or a patent application, and that tells everybody what this patent covers. It's a very precise language, and the language is a little bit weird because it's really a combination of legal and technical language, and there are cases where one sentence can run more than one page long. It's really absurd, but it's absolutely true. So it takes a little bit of patience and a little bit education to go through such writing, but in any case, a person cannot be a true inventor or co-inventor unless that person has materially or significantly contributed at least to one claim. Why is that important? Because especially in the academic environment, sometimes people get so confused. This is very different from academic publication. If you belong to a research laboratory, even though the lab director, usually the professor, he or she may not have contributed anything to your particular experiment or your discovery, but it's classic, and it's routinely done whenever you publish a paper academically. You may be the first author or authors, and the senior author or the last author has to be the lab director. Okay, so they always honor, the laboratory leader that way, but not in the case of a patent or patent application, unless that person can demonstrate, during the discussion on such and such date, and I have written documentation I told this my PhD students or whatever, you should try this, and my prediction came true, and that ended up being a very important part of this particular claim. And then that professor can be a co-inventor. Otherwise, that professor has no business in calling himself or herself a co-inventor of this type. And it's just not, it's more than just interesting academic differentiation. In the patent lawsuit, if a patent has a wrong inventors listed, that could be the ground for that whole patent to become invalidated in court. Because the theory is that if you make any incorrect statement about the patent, anything important, including who invented this patent, then you have just defrauded the US government in obtaining that patent, and therefore the whole patent can become invalid. So it's very serious business, and people have used that cheap shot to shoot down a lot of otherwise very useful and very important patents. So don't screw with that idea.
So what happens if your inventor like signs off basically, I can't remember the name of the document, but they basically sign off that they're not gonna be, they're giving you all the ownership of the IP.
Right, that's different. Remember, so far I've talked about the inventorship. Who invents a patent or a patent application? No, owner is different. Owner, what you're talking about is assignment. Assignment agreement. Assignment just means transfer agreement in the IP language. In an assignment statement, a original owner, because remember the inventors can only be natural persons. So when a patent first comes into existence, it has certain number of inventors, and usually the inventors originally own this thing. But then the inventors, each one of them can choose to assign, meaning transfer, their share of the invention to someone else, and a lot of times to their employer, because they might be contractually required to do so. Because the theory is that usually the employers, when they employ you, especially if you're a technical person, there is an explicit expectation that you may come up with some wonderful invention, and that's why you are paid. So it's a fair exchange. This goes back hundreds of years in the British system called the shop right. So the shop owner, in the old days there weren't so many inventors, they were all mechanical shops. So shop right actually is today this kind of an employment-based assignment requirement. So a lot of times the people are required to do that. Sorry.
Now, let's say she becomes the assignee, the owner of a patent that is then was misdirected from the inventor side. So you said it's really bad if the inventor sort of misclaimed who invented it, right?
Yeah.
Now, unbeknownst to her, she purchased a patent, and now is this thing null and void because U.S. government said this patent? Where is she? Is she screwed?
Yeah, essentially. A lot of things can happen to a patent beyond any particular person's control. Sometimes it's
So she needs to do a shitload of
you might be just you may get dragged down the toilet by someone else, and it's out of your hand, and that can
So
happen.
I think Trump's all the way out there, kind of just walks with the patent.
They
Careful, Laura.
unfortunately this is like a situation you can't really split the baby.
Right.
So if the origin is bad, so it's too
Someone
bad.
can be an inventor, but that doesn't mean they own it, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you're still fine.
As long as
You have to acknowledge
Well,
that
but-
they're inventors, but then they don't
But
own
if you're the
it.
assignee and you're owning it, say you bought something from someone and you now think you're owning it.
No, that's not how it worked out, but just because if you have people, let's say you have software developers, for example, helping with your software, they can be contributors to the invention because they were doing the development, but it's really your idea, but so then you have them give you an assignment so that you.
She would be an inventor then in that case.
Hold that thought, because that is a very important topic when it comes to software. Remind me, okay? Because that actually actually traps a lot of people. So it's a very important concept, but I want to, wait until that time to give it the right structure. Okay, thanks. Very complicated ownership can actually happen because, believe it or not, I may be actually co-inventing a great concept with Alec there. The two of us have never met. I don't even know him. Okay, how the heck can that happen? Well, if I am working in my own little humble garage, I came up with this brilliant idea and I apply for a patent, and Alec working for his employer, Purple Mile, whatever, and he and some other people, and it's mainly his idea, almost identical idea. He also put in a patent application, and actually, the priority date, the initial filing date being the same day. When these two patent applications go up, and eventually at the U.S. Patent Office, they will say, wait a minute, these two things are almost identical. Guess what? You two need to talk. Unless you agree, we're not going to issue duplicated patents. Okay? So you two actually become joint co-inventors. Okay? And then certainly we don't have to agree on anything at all, because I don't like him. He doesn't like me. I don't want to talk to him, blah, blah, blah. So that could lead to some very interesting and complicated kind of a scenario in terms of how to get certain things done. In the academic world, this happens a lot because you can see that a particular inventor usually works with his or her collaborator on a different campus, or when someone starts working on the technology and then he or she moves to another university. So now all of a sudden, both universities end up having a piece of the action. So it could be a little bit complicated. We probably don't want to go into all that detail, because it's the issue is that when things are jointly owned, it could be a little bit complicated that who takes the initiative, who takes the responsibility. Think of it like if you own an apartment with your cousin. Now, after a while, you may disagree in terms of who should pay for the mortgage, okay, and who should collect the rent. And then there are a lot of other ownership issues that come with it. Well, intellectual property is property, so it comes with the same kind of headache. But we probably don't have time today to talk about this. One very important concept when people ask a question, should I file for a patent application? You should really break that down into two questions, not one. Because very, very often people just focus on the first question. Is it patentable? They forget to ask the second question. Is it valuable? Okay. These are two completely independent questions, believe it or not. Okay. Is it patentable? You need to look at the definition of patentability. On the next slide will show you that. Can you actually go through all the hurdles? Can you convince a patent examiner that your invention is worthy of a patent? And they have a lot of technical, highly technical issues that they're dying to ask you. And you have to answer them correctly in order to get a patent. But at the end of the day, is that patent that you will get, is it useful at all? They absolutely do not. They're not responsible for issuing only useful patents or valuable patents. A lot of issued patents are total garbage. If you Google the term, silly patents or foolish patents or useless patents or ridiculous patents, you're going to see some laughable issue patents, including one I remember it was issued. I guess probably in the 1950s, maybe, because when they started doing washing machines and people a lot of people get to understand, oh, that's like centrifuge, right? So you spin this something really, really fast, and things tend to, fly off on the tangent line, right? Great. So someone figured out, hey, this is great for delivering baby. So if you put the pregnant lady in the middle and you spin this thing fast enough, the baby can be literally spun out of her safely.
Gravitron.
Yeah. Even well, let's run to the trademark office and trademark that. We got a patent. Thank God it wasn't commercialized. Right? So these are two different issues that you got to remember, especially when it comes to like biotech, life science inventions. These two things are very, very different. You can actually say that I found out a way to do a medical device, and whether or not it's even practical. When I was in my corporate days, I was involved in the largest linear accelerator manufacturer in the world in radiation oncology for treatment of cancer. The radiation, linear accelerators shooting, mega voltage beams through human body. Anyway, so I actually helped one inventor. They actually got a patent on it. It's to do with one body part being difficult to irradiate. So they figured that they can actually strap the patient on this chair and flip them upside down, so the body part would actually, through again gravity, will be hanging, and that will be very convenient for the radiation to shoot from the side. So, I'm not kidding you. It actually is a issue patent. But the problem is how many patients would tolerate this kind of ridiculous treatment. You feel like rotisserie chicken, being fried. And then you also have to wonder about what about all the other alternatives, right? I mean, there are certainly existing alternatives that would treat patients with some more dignity. And it's not as bad. Well, it could be almost just as good. So you got to think about all these. But do patent examiners in U.S. Patent Office worry about those practical issues? No. They literally look at, I went through the patent exam and I passed, and that's why I can call myself a patent lawyer. So all you need to do is to study this patent examiner's manual about that thick. It's one huge binder. You read it from cover to cover, and you can tolerate that kind of ridiculously boring language and stuff. You can pass that stuff, and that's what they do. They for everything they do, they need to find a reference. They need to find a guideline in that manual. So they don't care about practicality. So you need to worry about this. And this is important because I can tell you, if I were, I'm not taking outside clients as a patent lawyer. But if I were, just for my own, financial sake, if I have a new inventor walking through my office door asking me, hey, Mr. I, do you think this idea is patentable? Professionally, I will probably have to think about it, and my answer most likely is, yeah, I think so. And would I remind him this is really a stupid idea? It's probably never going to be commercialized. It's not my job, okay? And I will get paid if I get a patent for this guy. So be careful who you ask your answers to and the kind of answers you get back, and think about what other things you might be able to ask. Maybe that will push them to have to answer some inconvenient questions. But I'm telling you, most of the things I can make your patent application patentable. if I just add a lot of crazy, restrictions to it, so many, such that in the end, your issue patent may not be very functional or very practical. But guess what? I have helped you get your patent. Pay me. Okay? So need to be a little bit careful with this. Also bear in mind that it's not about ego, especially in academia. We get that a lot. If we say that we're not going to file a patent application on behalf of your invention, a lot of times we get really bad, dirty looks. What do you mean? This is such an earth-shaking invention. Well, I have news for you. Newton cannot have patented his invention of gravity because gravity by itself is a force of nature. He only came across a natural phenomenon. He didn't create anything. He didn't invent anything. He just was smart enough to observe a natural law. That by itself is not patentable.
Interesting.
So you got to remember this. I mean, same thing. Darwin couldn't have patented the genetics. That's not patentable. So a lot of very important inventions or breakthroughs in science are not patentable. But that doesn't mean anything about their impact. So don't get crushed by that. We talked about patentability. Patentability depends on three things. Usually, first thing is not a problem. Subject matter, occasionally we get into that. And like I said, any force of nature, any rules of nature cannot be patented. But usually, most of the things you see are beyond that. And in today's world, most of the debates in terms of subject matter happens around computer software. Because computer software is more or less patentable in the US, especially if it's algorithm. So certain really clever algorithms, if it's the very first time invented, could be patentable. Case in point is Google's PageRank algorithm, invented by Larry Page during his PhD thesis work in 98, I think that was the case. My former colleague at Stanford, I did this kind of work for Stanford for 6 years, so he helped get that back. So that is certainly patentable, but outside of US, most of other countries do not respect computer software as patentable.
So what about, I mean, I'm just curious, what about like a process patent for software? Is that even possible?
Process patent is possible. And it doesn't have to be software alone.
Well, you're just thinking with software.
Any kind of a process,
So
kind of a steps. But software process is really hard to enforce because it typically, if you want to document several steps, unless you're talking about steps that typical software engineers never could think of. Because most of the time, software engineers, they follow very well-taught process steps to generate their software. So it's probably a little bit challenging.
So not so much the code, but the way that the app works in a process, like the steps.
I understand.
Yeah.
That is a little bit tricky.
Isn't that still algorithmic?
That's why I said it's tricky, because it could actually fall into another category, which is now less and less patentable. That's called business methods. If it's something that you can document in terms of several steps you follow from, it's almost like if you can think of a flow chart. On the flow chart, I can say that if I follow this step and I ask a question, yes or no, yes, you go this way, no, you go that way, and then the next step, and then eventually it's a system. Well, in the early 1990s, there were many business method patents that got granted. The most famous or infamous one being Amazon, who actually started the one-click. They're saying that, it was such an amazing insight. You know, it used to be that a lot of people, in order to buy anything, they will have to click through a lot of clicks. We have this wonderful idea. All you need to do is say, well, take me through your, you know, kind of a basket, right? What do you call that?
Shopping cart.
Shopping cart, thank you. Take me through my shopping cart. I click, and immediately it asks me, do you want to pay? Yes, that's it. And they actually got a patent on that. So all of a sudden, all of their competitors using a similar idea become infringers. So you can imagine there was a whole total mess. So the patent office learned from that lesson, and that was no longer enforceable. So a lot of, and also a lot of other business methods, because business methods tend to be a little bit very generic, and it's very difficult to predict who might end up infringing your business method. Because even people who have been doing this for years, they might have been doing this without knowing that they've been following your newly invented flowchart. You know, so the question is that really fair to award someone a business method? So at this point, almost universally, business methods are very, very difficult to get a patent on it. And even in the heydays, only the US actually issued business method patents, which got criticized by a lot of other countries. So no, we don't do that anymore.
I got two questions. What you just said is not considered prior art. If somebody's already doing it and then you just go ahead and patent it.
That's exactly right. You can use a prior art, the fact that someone else has been doing the same thing, and you can document it to defeat even an issue patent. Not to mention that during the patent application process, that's typically the back and forth between the patent examiner and the patent applicant. You know, the patent examiner would say, hey, wait a minute, I've seen this, here, show it to you. This is, I've met one patent examiner, or former patent examiner, who was very proud that he has once referenced the Bible to strike down a patent application. It turned out to be a mechanical device with some, you know, vehicle or whatever. I mean, I'm not religious. I can't tell you. He was very proud.
Second one has to do with clever algorithmic software, and you referenced China. Can you touch on the EU? I mean, China's the one in a whole different basket, but you said there's no real protection outside the U.S. The EU is a little softer than China as far as one extreme?
First of all, step back a little bit and look at the broader picture. Very important point I forgot to mention. Patents are a unique governmental instrument. In other words, every single patent, you have to ask, who issued this patent? It's always a government, okay? Because it is an exchange that inventors have made with each and every government. It says, I am willing to disclose, I am willing to publish my patent and to teach the whole world about my invention. In exchange, you give me some limited monopoly on this technology, and usually it's 20 years. And such that my disclosed or published patent would allow the whole world's technologists to understand, to get some insight, and maybe they could build on top of this. Or they could, if they want to, they could try to work around my patent, and then get certain things done without paying me. Or they have to license my technology, but maybe they can improve upon it. And that's how human civilization advances itself, right? I mean, so you step on, you know, this is sort of each other, and eventually you can actually lead to more important inventions. But it's always an exchange with a single government. And therefore, the US patent is only enforceable within the US jurisdiction. A China patent only works in China, only covers China, Japan, and EU. EU is more complicated. They just went through a unitary patent system. in the last several years. So now it's possible for you to actually obtain an EU patent that covers all 37. Can't remember. I might be wrong, but plus or minus 2. So many countries. It's expensive, or you could actually choose to apply for an EU patent, and then at the time of grant, you could then say, I don't have the money to pay for all those countries. I'm only going to pay for, usually the big 3, UK, Germany, and France. The other countries, well, good luck. If you live in other countries, you want to infringe my patent, I'm not going to, drag you to court, because it's not covered by, Spanish patent or Italian patent. So it's a lot of times a very detailed calculation based on, again, dollars and cents. We talked about the first one, the 3 most important criteria. It needs to be useful. Usually it's not a problem. It needs to be novel, meaning prior art. Okay, no one else has thought of this idea before. Okay, so no public disclosure, no printed publication, no previous patent application or issue patents, and in the U.S. we have a 1-year grace period, meaning if you publish something or if you stand up in a seminar or some kind of conference, you disclose, you teach people about your invention, well, you still have technically 1 year. Within 1 year of your first disclosure, you still have that much time to apply for a patent application. And that is also important. Warback. People often ask me, I have actually talked about this in a conference. Do I lose the patentability of this idea? Well, it depends. If your talk was enabling, meaning if it would enable someone technical to actually practice this particular technology, sorry, it's gone. Okay, so after 1 year, it's absolutely gone. Okay, but if all you did was to brag about how you can actually create a new engine that would, that will burn 1 gallon of gas and run 200 miles, but you didn't really tell them how. What was the technical trick enabling that? Then your disclosure is considered not enabling, and therefore you haven't really disclosed the core technology yet. Then it's still at play. The third element is called non-obviousness, which is actually not that obvious. It's a very tricky standard, and there have been all kinds of court cases challenging a given patent's non-obviousness. And the biggest challenge is that after this KSR case, it's KSR versus Teleflex, a case about 2007, a case decided by US Supreme Court. After that case, a lot of patent applications will get rejected by citing this case, because the case would allow the patent examiner to say that if you have 3 major components of your invention, A, B, and C, all 3 components have been disclosed before. People have known about these 3 different components, but you said that you are the first one who can actually combine all 3 elements together. Wonderful. Sometimes it's very, very useful, but unfortunately, by the KSR's teaching or the previous case, it will be considered too obvious. Okay? Because the idea is this. Here's some pencils with eraser heads. In the early 1900s, somebody tried to patent that, and it was rejected, because the idea is that, okay, you have a pencil, people knew how to use a pencil for a long time, and you have an eraser, true, when you combine a pencil with an eraser head, yeah, it's very, very useful. Unfortunately, the patent office will say that's too obvious because you lack that critical moment of invention. So in the, well, I didn't say it here. In the EU documentation, in their language, they call it in a different name, but it's the same idea. They call it an inventive step. They want to see this inventive step, which is significant enough. And what I call it is the aha moment, the eureka moment, the moment of, lightning strike. It's like a moment of genius. You're taking a shower, you've been thinking about this, and all of a sudden you stop in the middle of the shower, you say, God, this is it. I found, this is my breakthrough. You have to have that sense of excitement. If it's just, oh, well, if you put the eraser here to the end of the finger, you flip it, that'll be kind of nice. The patent office would say, sooner or later, some idiot from the street would come up with the same thing, Then it's not an invention, it comes to this obviousness or non-obviousness issue, okay? Here in the US, we have not so many choices, but there are still several choices that you should know about. One thing is that we have a very unique system which is very important for you guys, for all the entrepreneurs. It's called provisional patent system, which is very unique in the world. A provisional patent will give you a temporary coverage for only 1 year. It's actually a very poorly chosen name. It's actually not a real patent. It acts more like a reservation system. It's like, you go to a busy business, they said that, take a number. And so go there and you take a number. And then you wait for the counter person to call your number, right? And then you present whatever application materials that you have. That's what it is. This provisional patent application is just taking a number. What is that number? Well, that gives you the all-important priority date. That is your application date. When you turn in your provisional application, usually within the day, you will get back the priority date. And here's your provisional patent application number. And also very important, from that date on, you can now claim you have a patent pending technology. Oh, that sounds really neat. When in fact, you may not have much substance in that patent application at all, but only you know. But other people won't even be able to find out until much later, right? What is it used for is that within 1 year, you have to make up your mind. If you want to move forward, you have to put in a real non-provisional application to replace this one. That's what I'm saying. All you're getting is this reservation ticket number, but that doesn't really get you anything. You have to put in the real application. So within 1 year, after 1 year from the original application date, provisional patent expires, you got nothing, absolutely nothing. You have no coverage whatsoever. Your entire application is gone. So you have to remember to, put it. The deadlines are very, very important in a patent system. So there are many deadlines, and anyway, I have a lot of stories to tell you, but you have to remember to so-called convert the provisional patent application into a non-provisional patent application, which is normal. So when people say that I have a patent application, you typically will want to ask, was it provisional or non-provisional? Non-provisional patent application has another name called utility application. It's because in the old days it was only utility application, but anyway, it's the same thing. So once you have that, you need to remember the non-provisional is really the important game. And the provisional patent application, there's one very important feature that you should know about. funny thing is that provisional patent applications are never seriously read or reviewed by anybody. It literally just sits on the shelf for 1 year. And you said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? So why do we just do, is this a joke? No, because only when you put in the non-provisional patent application, you know, now you are serious, right? You put in a non-provisional application, now the patent examiner will pull out of the file, will compare your non-provisional application with your provisional application, make sure you didn't try to steal the base. The application should look very similar in structure and the actual invention should match. You cannot say, well, I'll put in some garbage, you know, provisional application, no one will read it, and then when I put in a non-provisional application, I'll say, oh, well, this one is a continuation of my provisional, but that's actually, it's a bait and switch, there's nothing in common. That doesn't count. They will actually come back to you and say, you just put in a new application which cannot inherit the old priority date. So we like you as a customer, but we will give you a new priority date of the new patent application, so you just wasted your provisional application. Sorry, I got several hands.
I think you answered my question.
Okay.
What would be the sort of price difference on both ends? On one, of
Very different.
the cost for just if somebody did it on their own versus if somebody went to your old firm. You get the idea.
Which is
And then
which
think
is
about
why.
Legals then.
Well,
Yeah, throw legal zoom in there.
no, there's no commercial endorsement.
She wants to go down that route.
For any
My sister highly
service.
advised against, but-
No, this is also why earlier I said this provisional patent application system is very important for all entrepreneurs because it costs very little. Okay, it costs only several $100s.
That would be if you did it on your own.
On legal.
If you did it on your own, and also when you do it on your own, anytime you deal with the patent office, remember that for you guys, always remember this: you are a so-called small entity, meaning, you know, can't remember their official definition. Is it the same as the U.S. government? U.S. government defines 500 employees or less as small entity. I think that's probably the same. 500. 500. Or any nonprofit is automatically classified as a small entity, or any education institution. So no matter how large. So UH enjoys a small entity. Basically, what U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO, you get all the fees half off. So that's kind of nice. Okay. So in the case of a provisional patent application, I don't remember the exact cost now. It's less than $500 for a small entity. And also the application is really quite simple. Their requirement, formality-wise, is very straightforward. You need to fill out like a 2-page application form. Most of the things you can figure out yourself, or by some, if you ask some online questions, you will see enough examples. And the important thing, all-important thing is that you have to disclose what your invention is. And provisional patent application lets you get off the hook easy. They don't even require any claim at all. You don't have to construct the important claims, which is why you spend a lot of money on the good patent lawyer. You can actually get away with just describing your invention. Why is there a need for your invention, and what have you just invented? Okay, and therefore I can tell you, as a matter of practice, there are many universities for their not the most important inventions, meaning sometimes there are very important inventions and you know them because the type of inventions and the kind of applications and the kind of industry, you better spend some serious money. But there are also a lot of iffy inventions that are kind of not so exciting. I can tell you, as a matter of practice, there are plenty of universities that would actually apply for a provisional patent application with only the manuscript of a paper, of an academic paper, because typically the manuscript would actually spell out, this is what we discovered. Okay? And then you simply wait. Within 1 year, if the experiments actually have gone through, pretty successful experiments, you have collected more data. And here's another unique feature in the US. In the US, we're very kind and gentle to inventors. You are allowed to supply new experimental data at the end of the 1 year period, from a provisional patent application to non-provisional patent application, as long as you haven't changed the experiment. Okay, so you can predict, I'm going to actually do this experiment and I know this will work. That's fine. At the time of application for provisional patent, you don't have to have all the solid data. You can actually predict. And then the data can come within a year. If that's the case, then you can then go to a good patent lawyer or patent agent and try to do it that way.
So like, if you have an idea, then it's like kind of more of just an idea. You could get a provisional patent, and then if you feel like you really want to flesh it out more, like add the details to it later, you can add the details to it later, or do you have to have the same kind of application?
It depends. It depends a lot on your details. So if what you call details are truly not very important, what they call new subject matter. So it depends. The patent examiner certainly has a right to reject this and saying that, you're going way beyond your original description. What you call details, I call complete changing direction, and it won't be allowed. But a lot of times that may not be the end of the world, because you can argue, well, okay, in that case, can I actually apply for the original one, and then I'm going to add a couple of new claims, kind of a new direction. So actually, even within the same application, you might have two sets of claims with two sets of priority dates.
So is that sort of the same thing if like you have your main goal and what you're trying to achieve? Let's say you added a feature that enhanced it. Is that sort of that same wishy-washy area, or is it just an extra feature that supports the overall?
Again, it depends.
Yeah.
And remember, you also want to think about, in terms of patent strategy, that think of it not just individual patents, but it's all different steps along this patent strategy. So what you want, ideally, you want your first fundamental patent to be very, very broad, and to cover a whole section of direction, okay? So that other people cannot even get close to you. But as a matter of practice, you're not going to develop your technology doing all of these things. So eventually you want to actually focus a little bit more on more specific things. So your very first patent could be very broad, but kind of not very specific. And then you start building your patent tree. So it's a tree structure, more and more into the finer details. But every step along the way, you have your defenses. You're really putting out like a toll gate on different roads. So initially, it's like I want toll gates around this whole mountain, and then you're going to be more refined, setting up additional tolls. Make sure that your position is well defended. Okay, so think about it that way, and also think about the fact that sometimes it's not cost effective for you to do repeated filing if all you're doing is to set up one toll here and then 50 meters later another toll there, and you're paying the price for two tolls, and these things are expensive. We'll get there. Okay, so if you know that you have a fairly solid patent already covering this approach, don't waste your time and money. Keep repeating yourself. sure, you have money to burn, your patent lawyer probably would never stop you from doing that. But what's the point? Okay. So,
So just in summarizing that, so if you,
Yeah.
if you think your technology can go in all these different directions, but it's not necessarily the MVP you have now, you should just broadly cast a net and write your patent for where you think it's gonna go and with all these added things. But then maybe then if you don't, a year later, don't have all those things, then.
you need to also be able to look a little bit into the future, especially how much money do you have? You need to carefully think it through, because one thing that's pretty sad for some entrepreneur is that in the very first patent application, they actually have they have disclosed way too much information. Okay, but later on you will be asked, so what do you want to claim, and how expensive your patent application will become, both in terms of the number of claims, the more claims they start charging you extra, and also your lawyer's fee. And the patent office, after a while, they will say, oh, you are trying to apply for not one patent application. This is not one, it's too complicated. You need to break it into 3. So they force you to do that. And you have to choose one that then will continue. The other 2, they will say that, you have, maybe a couple of years or more, you can come back and claim those, to branch them off as new applications, kind of a derivative application. Every single application costs how much money? So do you have that kind of money to keep this tree that big? The problem is, if you decide at a later stage, you have already disclosed so much, but you don't have the resources to actually pursue all these things, to see them through, you have just given up. Other than the main application that you have money to fund it, the other ones will be donated to the general public because you have disclosed it. It's now published as a patent application. Patent applications are automatically published 18 months from the priority date. Okay, so you have already taught the whole world. Now, if you don't follow through with claims that would actually stake around your territory, well, that's your loss. So you need to really think about this, and sometimes if the area is not hugely competitive, you may actually have more time than you realize. So you want to put in applications, certain things that you believe that your business will be able to pursue within the next few years, and some other ideas you actually want to keep your mouth shut, and until you have time and energy, and most importantly, money, to pursue those. Okay, so again, those are things that your patent lawyer may or may not have the time to talk to you about, and also, they may have their own other thinking. So think about that. So choices. Other than the U.S. patent applications, we just talked about provisional and non-provisional. There is international, outside of U.S. Well, the good news is that almost all the countries and regions have joined this thing called PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty. They have all signed the same treaty. That makes it possible for you as an American inventor to file a patent application only with US PTO, with the same government body that handles provisional and non-provisional. But now you can actually submit a PCT application saying that I also intend to apply for a later date. You don't need to decide at the time of application. You said later date. At a later date, I will decide whether I want France, UK, Germany, China, Japan, blah blah blah. Okay, and it gets a little bit expensive. Originally, it costs a little bit more than a U.S. non-provisional patent application, but soon, when you have to make a decision, it's a 30-month, 2.5 years from the first priority date. You have to, if you take a PCT route, 30 months after the first priority date, you have to decide which country you want to enter. And then you start paying every country's their own patent office fees. So, and each country is usually, 15,000, 25 to 30,000 from the beginning to the end. So you do the math very quickly. One single patent application can end up costing you way more than $100,000, okay, within 5 years, okay. So it gets really expensive. So you need to be very careful. Okay. So the patent filing, here in the US, there are these paths. A lot of people will go through provisional patent application, and then within a year, they convert to utility or non-provisional patent application, and then you go with USPTO, US Patent and Trademark Office. You try to obtain your patent that way. Or you don't have to go with a provisional patent application. You can go straight to a non-provisional. You can skip this step, okay? And if you know for sure this is what you want to do and want to get your patent as soon as possible, okay, and you have the money to start with, sure, why not just go through utility patent application? And then even if you go through that route, within 1 year, you can still convert to PCT application. Okay. So PCT application can always come as almost an afterthought within 1 year of your first patent application. Okay. Or you can actually go straight to PCT application, because guess what? USPTO is one of the offices within the PCT structure. So you can say, oh, I'm going to be consistent with all the different countries. I want to go straight to PCT application, and then 30 months later, I will tell the patent office, I want to enter the US as what? As one of the countries I want to enter. And so in that case, all your patent applications will be, you hope, will be managed or will be looked at in a more consistent manner. There's no guarantee that we'll do that. Each patent office actually has their own idea, but that's another way to do it, okay? We talked about the cost. Typically, 15,000 to 25,000, it will cover probably 80% of the cases, but there are always different situations. And also it really depends on what kind of lawyers you get, or patent agents. So you can't say for sure. Certainly with more claims and more complicated patent applications, you end up paying more. But compared to the litigation lawsuits, that is nothing, because there was one very good survey done by American Intellectual Property Law Lawyer Association, IPLA. This was actually about 10 years old, but still, the average cost of a patent lawsuit is more than $4 million US average. And what does it mean by small case? Well, they define small, saying less than $25 million being disputed. That is a small case. Okay. So certainly most of the entrepreneurs will probably look at that kind of a, now occasionally if you get dragged into a bigger case, you expect that fee to be also more expensive. Okay. And it typically will last quite a few years. There's one particular lawsuit that I followed religiously, because at that time I was working for Stanford. So Stanford versus Roche, the large pharmaceutical conglomerate in the world. It went through litigation for more than 7 years, and went through the district court, the initial local court, to the Court of Appeals, second level, and multiple back and forth, and finally it went all the way to US Supreme Court, and Stanford lost. So, yeah. Legal fee, more than $7 million. And more than 7 years of agony. So, yeah, it's very sad but true that the more we do so-called patent reform through US Congress, the more, in my personal opinion, it seems to me that we're pushing the entire patent system out of reach for most of the small inventors. It is now in the hands of big corporations. They get to play the game sometimes very unfairly. So there was a very well done movie. I forgot the name of title of the movie. Intermittent windshield wipers. There was a somewhat half crazy inventor who's a sole inventor. He invented the intermittent windshield wiper. It used to be just either slow or fast, right? And he invented a way to control them very nicely, so depending on, yeah, that's him. And he insisted in bringing lawsuit against all the car manufacturers. So in the end, he became sort of crazy. Lost his family and lost his sanity almost, but he made a lot of money out of it. But I think it was a rather realistic portrait in terms of what to expect. In 2013, we went through the last major reform of patent law. Unfortunately, in my opinion, I've followed the legislature process because I was in law school back several years before then as part of my study. And it's amazing that all the hearings, they only got large corporations to testify. And they all went for there are several very important provisions that actually I thought was entirely unfair to small entities and small inventors. But that's called a reform. So be very careful with this. And also when you try to enforce your patents, remember very carefully that this is all about money, all about dollars and cents. So don't take your sense of right or wrong of morality, take them out of it, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the money to sustain the lawsuit, it could really bankrupt you.
David, are there ways that they can, make actions to lower the cost of getting a patent? Like, are there actions that they can take to make it easier on the lawyers, or are there actions that they can take, best practices maybe, that they can do research on their own in order to lower this cost?
Right. Certainly, depending on the lawyer, some lawyers would actually will be willing to work with you to actually lower the total cost, because you're willing to do part of the work, either prior art search so that they wouldn't have to, or when it comes to like claim construction. And don't remember, it all depends on when you go to a wedding, you're planning a wedding, how much money you have to spend. Really depends. What kind of a cake do you want, right? Simple cake or 12-layer cake or what? And what kind of fancy venue you want. It all depends on what kind of a patent you want to get, right? If you insist in making this patent application so complicated and involving so many different ways, and it's convoluted, it's hard to even describe, it's going to cost you much more money. Okay? So try to be better educated about the patent system, and try to be reasonable in terms of what you want to get. And remember this, later I will also comment on this, timing is very important. When I was an entrepreneur, and even when I was a venture capitalist, I never saw the need to get a patent immediately. But then I crossed the line into the dark side. Now that I'm a lawyer, I see a lot of people screaming that I have to have a patent from the first day when I start my business. I need to have a patent. It's like where did this come from? You know, out of the companies that I actually invested in, not one had a patent or patent application when I invested. And I did really well. My success rate was more than 50%. So, and I can tell you that they actually, some of them were able to file patents only after they get funding. And I think that's a very, very viable alternative. Because most of the time, the field that you are entering may not be as competitive as you believe. So your brilliant idea will not be stolen after just, even if you wait just half a year or whatever. Wait until you get the initial funding. And also remember, when you start too early, you could get into the trap of, well, now that we have started the clock, so at such a point in time, I have to disclose all of this, otherwise I lose it. So you end up being chased by something you created. Okay, it's really not natural. So the timeline could actually get out of hand. So I have seen entrepreneurs, telling me, I wish I knew how much it will cost me on this thing. And now that their baby is halfway due, so they can't push it back. They have to spend the money to sustain life. And they wish that they knew, they had known earlier. So the timing is another issue. Good point.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So, well, these are some of the larger cases. I just looked it up last year, major cases. So, and this is why people actually spend a lot of money on patents. And also another very sad statistic is that among all the issued patents, about half of them will end up being the subject of lawsuits. So, yeah. And by the way, don't ask me who won, because believe it or not, most of the lawyers, when they look at the case, that's not what we focus on. We don't care about who won and who lost. It's important to know what principle was created out of that case. That will be referenced in the future litigation. So, but anyway, it's just for reference.
David, before we go into coffee break, there's
Yes.
a couple of questions from the folks who are streaming in.
Please.
So maybe we could take like a 5-minute break and then call in the folks that are calling Matt. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, guys. Okay. Then you can think
Go.
of other questions. Okay?
No.
Do I just put it
Yeah, someone else acknowledged Matthew's question.
We don't need to do Q&A at the end.
But they said that they had the same questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody really
I mean, we're going at a good pace here. We're halfway
Yeah,
through.
Yeah,
yeah,
university,
We are.
yes, studying under a lab, who wants it, yeah.
Never asked my question.
So Jimmy.
Computer software.
I'm trying to ask that too.
You
guys, me and Marty have to leave at
Oh, yeah.
8, so
What was hired in general development?
So I think you did it.
Right.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And Matt, you know Matt Lynch.
Yeah.
He works under Vasily. Yeah. So he's on their team actually.
Oh, okay.
he's sick right now, so he's just conference
Okay, cool.
Hi, Matt.
Yeah, he may have about these things.
Thanks for
As
joining us.
far
Is he
as
the one that had the
you
question?
swing off
No,
and
Matt Carnes has a question. Yeah.
you would
Yeah.
get a side.
But probably a similar
Side
question
advantage.
related to like what happens to what happens when it's generated in the university.
Yeah.
If you have the owner, why don't you just be the
I
owner?
might stay in for
Right, so you're the owner, even though you may not be the inventor, or you may be the co-inventor. Right, so your company owns it, or you as a individual might be able to own it. How are you?
I know, but the whole thing about chains with them all that.
You're on back to or
Oh, EI.
The main part is
Yeah.
the one that they wrote down, which is like, has invited boards, but I haven't gotten into the guys.
A board meeting?
Huh?
A board meeting?
Well, they
Okay.
wear your profile hat, and you're
I
like,
think
I'm
Tom
Tom
would be
Benner.
good.
Here's what Pat does.
I heard that you
Ryan, it seems like you might be a big
Oh,
fan.
yeah, right, oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying, yeah.
And that might not be-
I guess that's why you heard all yours.
Jimmy, can give Matt a call?
Yeah.
And then he can ask his question. I didn't want to butcher his question. I'm sure he has follow-up.
I don't fully understand his question either.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's set it up for 4:30, but if I need to change, can I?
Yeah. And let me confirm with Alec too. So last night was both of us, and he's such a great perspective too on how to move things forward.
Okay.
So I'm checking with him tonight, and then yeah.
And then just want to know, in order to be more helpful with the meeting,
Okay.
should I try to finish my business plan or at least 80%?
Yeah, that would
Okay.
really
Or I
help.
can put you on speakerphone,
That
I
would
don't
help
know.
too.
We're taking a 5-minute break,
Yeah, whatever,
but
however far
I
along
think
you
it's,
get it.
answer your question,
And
you
then
can Matthew,
prior to
or
that
sorry,
meeting,
Alex said he didn't want to put your,
you know, the three
question.
of you
I sort of
really come
came up
together
with
and
the
decide
data that we started
internally like
touching
what you
upon
think you
on
need.
that, but I think
So we can know where to
basically
meet you
wording your
halfway.
question, if I asked it.
Yeah, and I think Alec's been on
require a
calls
follow-up
with you
of
guys
like,
recently,
well,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
he's
it's a
most
small
apt on
thing
it.
where I could just put you
Or
on
informed,
speaker,
but
and speak,
yeah,
everybody
let's
gets
try to do it.
Okay, and
sort
in
of
the
on.
business plan, you want something in there like
So if you wanna do that, you wanna have a discussion with them, I think
SWOT
that'd be kind of fruitful,
analysis,
it's pretty good. at that.
Yeah.
industry background, that kind of thing, right?
So if we
Yeah,
wanna start,
I think-
Just ask
start
for
right
this
to that, why don't I just,
Yeah, mostly background and like,
you can just, you can have a conversation, I think that we're gonna be able to hear it.
was it last night? Sorry.
And are you live stream working pretty good? Okay, let's do that, that makes the most sense, and I think we can probably hear you just fine, my phone works good, so. Okay, give us about 5 and I'll play that. Okay, shoot. Matt's gonna, if it's cool, Matt's gonna call
Uh-huh.
in 5.
Is he on there?
He's gonna call in 5 minutes,
Oh, in 5 minutes?
and can I just speakerphone him in?
Yeah.
And then just put the phone right here, and then I'll ask if I'm pretty sure his question's gonna require a follow-up.
Yeah, no, that's what I was figuring. That's why I wanted him to call in.
He's sort of, yeah, well, I don't know, is there a number he can call into?
No, we shouldn't call him the Polycom. We should just do it off the phone.
Yeah, let's put my phone right here, and I think
Yeah.
everybody shuts up so they can hear it.
Yeah, it'll be good.
And then,
Yeah, but good questions so far.
Times can really be a negative thing for a young startup or for an IP owner. And that's why personally, for me, I don't like that term. You know, and I will say that what's fair is fair. What you could do, a better alternative or more fair alternative for an employer is that as an employee, I'm willing to say, you know what? I will give you a 3-month or even 6-month option period. So during the 3-month period or 6-month period, I will not approach any other third party. Let's try to negotiate the deal. But the deal will be completely private between me and my employer, right? And if we cannot finish the deal, then hey, you know, you need to set me free. After 3 months or 6 months, I know for sure I can actually take my IP and shop around somewhere else. You know, that, to me, that will be a more fair treatment, but you know, it is what it is.
Okay. That answer your question, Matt? Good?
Yeah, that's one of them. Then I have a second question if I can.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So can you give advice on building closed source software on top of open source software? So, you know, would it be better to just design things that maybe, you know, plug into an open source existing software, or what is the legality of taking and building on top of instead of adjacent to?
Yeah, software, open source software can be a very, very complicated topic because the main reason is that there are many different open source licenses and each license has its own terms. So it really, really depends on which open source software that the open source software you're using, you know, what license did it come with? And that is a critical issue. And let me give you some examples. In the most extreme example, some open source software come with such a license that says it's extremely so-called contagious. So you use their software, any component, and then you build additional software around it, and you so-called you link to their library, and to create additional software pieces. I'm sorry, whatever new innovation that you have generated, the new software code is now entirely contaminated by the same software license. You have to license back or license to any other third party. You have to use the same software license, and you have to donate your derived new code to the same open source community. You have to deposit there. So, and then you're pretty much stuck, okay? And then there are the other extreme, kind of a more, open, more favorable to commercialization kind of open source that says, you know what, this stuff that you are getting from the open source community is governed by such a liberal software license scheme that you cannot actually commercialize this particular thing that you are licensing. But anything that you do beyond that is yours. And it's up to you. You can choose any kind of a software license on your derivative work or on your newly created software piece. Okay. Either commercially or non-commercially, either open source or the traditional licensing model, it's up to you. So these are the two extremes. And there are several major open source licenses that are in between. So there's no way to really answer that question very broadly, but you are well advised to learn a little bit if you want to, again, save on your legal costs, learn a little bit on the overall licensing schemes of different open sources. And also, you can help yourself a lot by analyzing your own software code and understand that you are not mixing too many pieces of software from different open source licenses, and that will be the kind of a more nightmarish scenario, and that's where people spend a lot of money doing the analytical investigation. And by the way, that's a long time. And in case the author was hired to do something, so-called a commissioned work, okay, so it actually goes to the copyright that's now owned by the commissioning people or whoever that paid for. Okay, in that case, it's 95 years from the first publication or first use or first sale, or 120 years from its creation. Okay. In any case, it's a very long time. So that's the good news. So copyright includes all kinds of things which you are familiar with, but it also includes musical works and even sound recordings. You're all old enough to remember the Intel Inside campaign, doom 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 doom. Those are 4 notes are copyright because it's unique, right? I mean, it's not something you don't hear it often. Artistic works, and I also wanted to bring to your attention, here is where copyright is often overlapped with design patents and also could overlap with trademark. So it doesn't mean which is better, which is stronger. The good news is that you have all of these IP protections available to you, and you should actually consider using them all. Certainly within reason, within your reasonable costs and stuff like that. But think about it. We'll come back to this one. Films, of course, broadcasts, of course, and even arrangements. So even though the specific songs could actually have their own individual copyrights, but then how you arrange them, how you actually make certain changes, those changes could be also copyrighted and owned independently from the original works copyright owned. Now, who owns it? Well, we already talked about much of this. So the owner can have all the rights to do all of these things. So without their explicit permission or a license, nobody is supposed to do any of these things. Copyright infringement, the remedies are very straightforward. Usually it means that you want some damages. So they have unfairly profited from unlicensed copyrighted materials. So you want them to pay to you the lost licensing revenue. And plus, you get to ask for injunction to stop them in their trial, to destroy all of the copies that they have created. And they are required by court to disclose all the kind of subsequent, all the downstream commercial activities they have engaged in order for you to also try to stop all of those people in the downstream commercial activities. Award of damages, criminal punishments, this is very severe. If you catch people doing willful copyright infringement, you get to actually get your district attorney to be on your side, and criminal punishments can be handed down to the infringer. So they could be locked up in jail. That's pretty severe, okay? And a lot of people talk about how, for instance, in certain countries like China or India, copyright is not as well enforced, which is certainly true. It's also true that in a lot of those areas, they have a much lower so-called statutory damage that the court will grant you, which is very low. So you can bring a lawsuit, but you're not going to get a lot of money out of it. But those are cases where you cannot convince the court that you know how much money they actually owe you. If you can document your exact damages financially, you can actually go for the higher amount. But that's detail. What am I doing? Oh, okay, wrong button, sorry. Now we go to a design patent. We talked about the regular patent, which is 20 years in protection. Design patents cover 15 years. But the important thing is that design patents are not inventions. They're only designs, okay? So designs can only have ornamental function, kind of decoration function. It cannot have real utility function. So if you tell me that this particular design of the bottle is not only beautiful, but it helps you, it's an anti-slip, right? See all these rings? So you hold on to it, and even if you're sweaty, you're not going to allow it to slip through you have just destroyed your design patent, because that has a certain function. Okay? It cannot have any function utility. Okay? It can only be ornamental. And there are similar design patent ideas in almost throughout the world. Again, different jurisdiction, different government, different design patent scheme. Okay? And again, the contour bottle of the Coca-Cola, that actually design patent expired a long time ago. But they also got a trademark, because trademark can be three-dimensional. Okay? So that is a use when you have multiple IP protection. Sometimes one can fall through the crack, or one could expire. You can actually rely on another, and that's the beauty. Okay. Copyright and design patent can also coexist. Okay. Now, copyright or design patent usually do not overlap with regular utility patent or non-provisional patent, because again, the functional requirement of utility patent. Going to trademark. Why do we have trademark in the first place? Well, that is because as a society, we recognize the value of trademark is so that the consumers or the buyers will have some reasonable expectation of the kind of goods and services that he or she can get. So when we see McDonald's sign, I know I'm going to be, well, depending on whose side you are on, according to McDonald's, it's a well-lit, clean, efficient place where you can enjoy a good, nutritious meal. Well, if you're like a lot of other folks who are saying that you're gonna get pretty substandard meal that always tastes lousy, right? And cheap, and it's blah, blah, blah. But the important thing is that you know what you're getting, right? You know pretty much how much money, you know pretty much what kind of quality, you know pretty much the way of service. You already have that kind of an image in your mind before you step into any particular McDonald's restaurant. Okay? And that is the value of trademark. So what is the most important thing about trademark? It avoids confusion among the relevant consumers. Okay? So we'll come back to this, I think, very quickly. So it could be logo, like Coca-Cola, those words. It could be Coca-Cola with those stylistic writing. You know, it could also be text or more fancy logo. For instance, the ones Apple is there, and the other one is
Nike.
Nike. Thank you. And also remember their tagline of Nike?
Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah. I will have to assume, I actually didn't research this at all. I will have to assume they might have trademarked just do it, the tagline.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. And that is really quite smart of them, because it's actually a very, you know, very kind of.
So I used to have that on my screensaver. Could they have sued me for?
No, again, fair use doctrine. Now, also in terms of trademark, it's the same thing. The question is, what's the damage? Now, did you take advantage of their trademark commercially? Did you get any money? No. So your counter argument is that I advertise for free for you guys, you jerk, right? Yeah. Which is true. Yeah. Yeah. So logo and text, and you may have perpetual forever. You may be able to protect your trademark as long as you keep paying. I think it's every 10 years you pay, and then it could last forever. Wow, that's a whole lot better than design patent 15 years, you know, the regular patent 20 years, right? So remember this. But it's really important to know this too. It's okay to use your own trademark, not these guys. It's entirely fine as a new entrepreneur to have your own logo and start using it without registering that trademark at all. As long as you haven't infringed on someone else's existing trademark in your own jurisdiction, okay? So, and this is important to know. Sometimes we will see a case a little bit later. Sometimes even if later on, let's say 2 years later, some big business actually comes up with the same trademark and they actually register it. You know, I didn't know about it, so I didn't have the time to protest and saying you can actually object to a trademark registration. They're saying we've been using it, you know, and our customers all know it. So, you know, that trademark registration should be rejected. You know, but you didn't know about it, so too late. And later they got the trademark registered, and now they come back to you saying that you have to take it down. You can actually try to defend yourself, and the court often would allow you to continue to use your trademark in your own market as long as you don't expand beyond your current size. So this is really a good protection for a lot of mom and pop operation. You know, otherwise a lot of large corporation would end up trademarking their trademark and then putting them out of business, and that will be unfair. So there is a certain protection over small players in that sense. To stop others from using it, you better register it first, of course. If you don't care about suing other people and you're just starting out, it may not be all that important, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen young startups, you know, after 1 or 2 years, they change their business model, they change their product. Sometimes they change even their industry. So their original trademark, you know, by now it's totally useless. They have to get new things. And so the idea is that until you're somewhat established, you know, especially if you don't have a whole lot of money, you know, don't be in such a rush to spend all your money on IP, you know, IP stuff. You know, so first make sure that you are really going to stick with this trademark, and then try to register it. And also don't try to go crazy registering in not only in the U.S. but in Japan. I mean, I have a former employer, which I will not name, that insisted that I take out trademark registration for all kinds of places on earth. In countries, I said, are we really going to like Portugal in the next 2 years? The answer was that maybe. Come on, I knew they weren't going to do that, but they got money to burn, so I kept my mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
Registering your mark. After the registration, you may use that trademark register R. Otherwise, you cannot. If you're using just your own trademark without proper registration, you know, you cannot defraud the society by using that mark. You get into trouble that way. Text, graphics, shapes, unique colors, or even sounds. Unique colors, very important. They won't just give you a random saying, I want to trademark bright red. Well, if they give you that trademark, imagine now you can actually go around the whole world, going around at least your neighborhood, suing everybody using the same color. No, that is hardly fair, right? So it's got to be some unique, very unique color. So it's not so easily done. Sounds, like I said, you know, certain, you know, very unique notes, sequences could be a trademark. Smell, a little bit hard to do. There are countless fragrance companies that will want to actually trademark their. You know, they're saying this is almost trademark. Everybody who smells this, oh, Chanel No. 5. yeah, right. But the problem is that it also has a function, right? It smells good. Right? So, again, the trademark, it's pretty tricky. And I remember a company trying to trademark the smell of new car. So they had a kind of a spray in the car. So no matter what kind of an old junky car you're driving, you can buy their little spray and spray it, and the car smells like brand new. I don't know, it's probably some artificial glue kind of smell. But they wanted to trademark that. But I actually didn't follow through. I don't know if that became successful or not. But anyway, that was among IP lawyer, that was kind of a fun to follow.
What about flavor?
Flavor is another thing. Flavor has certain function most of the time. For instance, if you can taste the sweetness, tasting sweet has a certain function. So that's pretty hard. Unless the flavor has absolutely no function, which is hard to imagine. And so, yeah. And certainly another issue is how do you actually enforce it? So remember this, at the end of the day, whenever you bring such a lawsuit, this is, by the way, true for all civil lawsuits in the US. Right? If you think someone has injured my financial interest somehow, you know, certainly IP right, you go to court, and then eventually such a determination of facts will be handed to the jury. So the ladies and gentlemen sitting in the jury box will have to decide, are A and B similarly confusing enough that you cannot tell the difference, you know? And that is that line, to avoid confusion among relevant consumers. That is the key phrase. So if you use taste, those poor jurors will need to say, same, different. I mean, how do you judge? Okay, because it's to most of the untrained people, for instance, I'm sure some of the winemakers have tried to make that argument. This wine has a subtle note of whatever. I mean, every time I read this thing, I say, what? I mean, who tastes this? Who gets so creative to write this kind of description? Some kind of a magic. I mean, they can even taste summer, spring. I mean, it's like, what is this? And now you have to ask those poor people to taste the subtle differences you can't even describe. That's a tall order. So for a number of reasons, sometimes you have to think about the practicality of such things, and that's indeed what's driving USPTO, US Patent and Trademark Office in handing out some rejections, because they have to be practical. They have to think twice before they hand out a trademark to be registered. They have to predict what kind of a new, kind of exotic legal cases will be brought upon them.
So is TM not used anymore?
Trademark? Oh yeah, you can.
Oh, I thought you said the R, sorry.
Yeah.
Same difference.
Yeah, same. Yeah. When you register trademarks, this is fortunately internationally standardized. So international trademark registration classification, there are always at least a 3-digit code that will tell you which section. So in other words, sometimes it's okay for you to get a very famous trademark, but they are not in your space. For instance, McDonald's, you may be able to, I don't think it works, by the way. You may be able to say McDonald's, but in an entirely different area, not food services. So 041, 025, and blah, blah, blah. And jurisdiction, of course. I already explained the situation that you don't want to go too wild, because even though each trademark registration is only several $100s, and don't overpay. There are some law firms that will charge you an arm and a leg for trademark registration. If your trademark is rejected and you're absolutely determined to want to fight it, it will get expensive. But if it's a straightforward registration, it really shouldn't be very expensive.
What's reasonable in your estimation?
If you do it yourself, it's again in the hundreds of dollars. And if you actually retain their service to do an initial trademark search, to do preliminary work, that's fine. But if your trademark registration meets opposition, and then how to overcome the opposition, they typically would start charging a real lawyer fee.
Right.
And then you can really stop and think about, do I really want to, do we need this particular trademark that badly? Or trademark is, by the way, also forever. Where is this? Here. This is a very good strategy. For instance, if you just try to do City U, I know, because I tried that and it didn't work, because Seattle, there's a city university that opposes it. Dublin in the UK has a Dublin City U, they also trademark City U. So they opposed it, and so it won't work. But guess what? That City U that I was helping was City University of Hong Kong. So all you need to do is add HK. So now it becomes unique, and then their opposition, the ground of opposition now is pointless, right? So now you can easily get that new one registered. Or another very convenient one is to say that, you know what, fine, City U is too generic. I will only get a trademark always with a logo, always with some graphics. So I do not get to assert my City U, only the text. If other people are using it, I cannot sue them. But what I can sue them is that if anybody will want to actually put the same graphic and the same writing, same text in there, I will sue them. Okay, and guess what? This went through all their jurisdictions with no opposition. I mean, nobody would do the exact same thing, right? You know. So again, if you ask a law firm, can you please help me get my city U registered? The answer is yes. It will only cost a little bit more money. We'll go through, we'll appeal, and then we'll appeal the appeal. Yeah, but there are a lot of other alternatives. They may or may not want to really discuss with you in detail. But remember, trademark, if it's descriptive, then it's again not fair for them to give you that trademark. For instance, tasty noodles, the best restaurant, you know, if they give you that trademark, then no one else can say we're the best restaurant in town. Then you get to sue them. That's just not fair. That's plain English. That could happen in everyday communication, right? So that's why if you have to do it, try to trademark something like just do it, and just do it with an escalation mark, or you know, and usually people don't say just do it in a commercial sense, right? And that's how they can actually get it registered as a trademark. Okay, and always go for something called fanciful mark. Fanciful mark meaning it doesn't naturally exist in the common language. Google, there is such a word, but very few people actually have ever used it, you know, until this Google came along. Okay, and now as people don't even know that there was such a word called Google before. So the fanciful use of a word can make it more viable in terms of trademark registration. You know, just do it, and even that check mark, it's a stylistic check mark. It's not just like not you know, with that you won't get registered. But this is a very fanciful kind of thing. In other words, there's a very little chance that it will conflict with some normal usage by other, you know, innocent parties. Now, oil of Olay, do you know what Olay is? Nobody knows, because it turns out to be a very, very odd, very rare reference to something, some organism, I can't remember. At one point I was curious, what is oil of Olay? Is it a person? Is it a region? Is it no, it's none of those things. And that's how they could actually get registered. So now it's like, oh, oil of Olay, whatever it means. Whatever it means to you, I have no idea. But it's a good strategy. A lot of value in trademarks. One thing is that you should know is that, oh, sorry about that. If it's too popular and too used, too common, it could become a generic term. And then it will lose its trademark. For instance, originally Xerox is Xeroxing, and then we start using Xeroxing as a verb, and now Xerox, the company, cannot actually enforce that term as a trademark, because people are saying, well, oh, go Xerox it, and then you can't sue them. And that's unfair, because everybody says it, right? So it's very funny, your own success can be a detriment. Escalator actually was originally invented by Otis Elevator, but now nobody remembers that. And the word escalator is just a word. Everybody says it. It's no longer a respected trademark. Google has a certain danger, and I'm sure they're watching it. So they always try to remind people that Google is mainly the name of their company. You know, it's okay for you to use it to describe, you know, put in a search key terms. That's okay. But don't forget, it's also our name, stuff like that. But we shall see. It's very interesting to watch. Trademark infringements, like I said, a lot of times it comes down to fairness. So there is a doctrine that if I am, for instance, my last name is AI, spelled AI, actually I could really, you know, do some interesting things with it, because because usually a family name, I could actually use my family name. If I have a business I call it Mr. AI, and there happens to be a Mr. AI trademark owned by someone, but I'm not saying, I'm not copying you, this is my family business. I'm not going to change my family for you, family name for you. You know, it's actually usually allowed. But there was a case where McDonald's use was struck down because they thought it was just a little bit unfair that they happened to find a person name with a family name McDonald trying to rip it off out of McDonald's. So Starbucks, this is an interesting case because this is where even though the wording very different, right? This one says coffee rocks, and also the symbol inside, the graphics, not the same, not even close to Starbucks. But again, it is, would it cause confusion among the relevant consumers, among the consumers looking for a coffee place? In the distance, can you actually get confused and believe, oh, that's a Starbucks? Yeah, and therefore, that was struck down as an infringement.
So actually in my situation, I've found out that there's a company actually based out of Florida that has the same name, but the words are inverted, or so it's so that's something I'm going to need to figure out. But using this as an example, like if I file a trademark, but then it also has the logo, which is used in concert with the the wording of the company, does that help the case?
Sure.
Right, since it
Anytime you add another element to make your trademark more distinguishable, more unique, it's always easier. Yeah. But you can also be advised to try the other one, and the more generic one without the logo treatment. Try it and see what happens, right?
Yeah, I guess that's another question that I kind of had was, using this as maybe as an example, did like the folks at Starbucks just like maybe have a customer who was in Belgium and like how do companies figure out whether there's some type of perpetrator or not?
Well, guess what? If your business is big enough, other people will take care of it for you.
Right.
There are these trademark infringement services, kind of trademark watchdogs. They claim that they have coverage over how many countries in the world, and they routinely will actually go through the market. Not literally walking through the market, but they try to alert you to any kind of potential infringement.
With small companies, like is it?
No, usually small companies can't afford it. Yeah.
So it's just like, I guess in my case, if I sort of have this sort of gray area situation, and then like there's this other company that's.
Well, again, which jurisdictions, which geographic locations you intend to begin operating right away? That's what you want to focus on. Because outside of that area might be interesting, but will you really want to take a case to Portugal or to Italy and try to win something? And that infringer may be another small business, so the best you could get is a few dollars. It doesn't even make sense. So think about where you want to focus your main market entry. Okay, sure. Academy, this is another interesting thing. Academy Award actually tried to sue GoDaddy because GoDaddy sold very confusing URLs to potential infringers, like this one, 2011 Oscars.com. The result is that Academy Awards lost the deal because the message is that, well, you can't sue the registration agent who sold these URLs. If you want to enforce it, you have to enforce it, police it yourself. You can't expect other people, other platforms to do it on your behalf. We already talked about this. I actually helped Stanford determine this. I was doing intern at Stanford General Counsel's office when they discovered that there was a very old swimming school and very successful. If you go to Hong Kong, you see a lot of their commercials everywhere, teaching kids how to swim. And they started in 1998. So you're saying, wait a minute, Stanford got started in the late 1800s, didn't they? Yeah, 1890, 1892, 1891, something like that. More than 100 years ago, but unfortunately Stanford didn't try to take out a trademark registration in Hong Kong until several years after 1998. So, Stanford could not do anything about this company, and they survived. This is the last content-wise, and then we spend several minutes, sorry about the time, on the strategy part. Trade secrets. Trade secrets are truly secret stuff that you don't need to tell anybody, and therefore obviously there's no registration requirement. Okay. 3 important elements. One, it has to be useful. Well, again, that goes without saying. And number 2, it's not known to outsiders. So you can't take some public information and claim this is trade secret. It doesn't even make sense. And you have to be able to show that you have taken some special efforts. So if you claim this is all trade secret stuff, but you leave it on the front desk of your company and without any protection, anybody walking by could see it, then the court would deny it. This is not trade secret. Trade secret is something that you protect by maybe a secret password, maybe a physical lock and key, something like that. And so you have to be able to show that you have done your reasonable job of protecting it. So it's not called infringement. A trade secret is not, the concept doesn't work, but rather it is a theft of trade secret, or it's a breach of contract, especially if they have signed any non-disclosure agreement, agreeing not to disclose any trade secrets. And you have actually, it really helps if your trade secret stuff is actually not only printed, but also labeled trade secret, company confidential, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, again, it's a matter of evidence. If you later have to prove that there's no other way that my competitor would have gotten this information because this is our procedure of protecting it, and this employee quit my company on such and such, and he had access to this information, and a few days later my competitor learned my trade secret. How does that happen? And then you could actually try to establish the fingerprint of how that got lost. Okay, and again, trade secret, like a Coca-Cola magic formula, I'm still not convinced that they truly have that trade secret, but they claim that the formula is still protected by trade secret. Who knows? This may forever be an urban legend, but that's what they claim, and you have to respect that's probably true. Since trade secrets, they're not obligated to tell anybody. So putting it all together, these are the terms. There are duration, but the important thing is that the common mistakes: apply for patents way too early. Sometimes the development is not even ready yet. So in other words, if I were advising you, I might actually, if I'm not incentivized by any monetary gain at all, I might actually tell you, I don't think you have enough to get a patent, because with your information, this application will get rejected outright. So you will be wasting your money. Can you go back and show this particular track, your design idea, it needs to be more unique, or this particular experiment, you need to show some initial data in order to convince a typical patent examiner. So this is too early, go back, do it. But most of the time, you may or may not get that kind of advice. And it's, like I said, it costs so much money, and once you start it, it's really hard for you to say, okay, fine, I don't care, I'll give it up. And then you end up getting stuck in terms of your overall strategy, and it's very painful sometimes. Don't overspend on trademarks, especially taking out trademark applications on so many different categories. I mean, right now you're in the food services, so don't go crazy with the stationery here and with education consulting services there. I mean, it will all cost you money. And also don't try to go to foreign jurisdictions way too early, because they are really expensive. Okay. Uncoordinated and no coherent IP strategy. This is when you have all of these things together, you really need to think through. The next slide would explain. First thing first, what are your sustainable advantages? You need to think about this. And sometimes I would advise people that it may or may not be your IP strategy, especially when the IP development is still in the early stage. It may not be your IP strategy that will be your best protection in terms of your sustainable advantages. And think about other potential competitive advantages. For instance, if you can actually form a strategic partnership with a leading and almost monopolizing partner, all of a sudden you get to become a monopoly, part of a monopoly. And that will be really, really important for you. Can you own a new category? Meaning, even though you're a small startup, can you actually try to carve out a new category? Even though other people may think this is only water, but what if I could add a little element of surprise? I will call this, magic water, or some kind of a water with a unique twist, and then I'll try to own that brand, own that kind of concept in the minds of consumers. And therefore, I put down what you're going after is mind share. Whether or not it's true is a different issue.
Good advertisement. That's good advertisement.
Yeah.
The
Now,
magic water.
and fight for limited resources. You can also try to leverage, for instance, when I was doing a startup in Beijing, it was in the consumer medical information area. And we figured out very quickly that in the city of Beijing, the capital city of China, there were only about 100-some, nationally recognized, officially, nationally recognized medical experts in Beijing. And the year was 1999, so in those days, people didn't earn that much money. So it was amazing that we could actually contract more than 50 of them to be our advisor, to be our special technical advisor. So those are precious and limited resources, and if you quickly lock them up, guess what? And now you have some competitive advantages, right? So there always are these possible ways for you to create sustainable advantages without any reference to your IP strategy. And then in terms of IP strategy, I would say go with the cheap ones and the important ones first. For instance, URL. It's unlikely that you will change your URL very, very often, and it costs so little. Okay, so try to come up with a good sounding URL, which is a little bit related to your brand that you try to establish, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. No. So I always try to do that first, because it doesn't cost too much money. And then choose a trademark to register within your state or within your country and within your initial scope of business in the same category, because again, it doesn't cost that much money. Okay. And then use non-disclosure agreements, and then try to protect your trade secrets, and then intentionally put down including patentable but not yet patented technologies. Okay. So if you could do that, effectively you can actually put your arms around things you want to protect, at least within your company first. Okay, make sure there's no obvious leakage, and then take your own time waiting for that IP development patent application to mature enough so that it can actually sustain a very successful patent strategy, and don't need to rush into it too early. And then file your patent applications in due course. That would be my advice. Okay.
So just one question, so with that
Yep.
1 year thing, I mean, if you put up a website and you kind of show like the different processes of your technology, would that be considered, or is it only really when you get into the physical code or whatever it is?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because if your algorithm is so straightforward that by showing just a typical kind of diagram of a process diagram or flowchart, you're giving away all your secrets, then your secrets probably would not be patentable. Okay.
Okay, any more questions? Great, well, thank you so much, David. And guys, can we thank David?
The last 2-3 slides were phenomenal. The advice piece that ties everything together.
Yeah, the strategy.
Yeah.
Because too often I think we as IP lawyers, we only get asked question in a very limited way, and people don't think about the overall thing. So we also get trained to react in a highly transaction approach.
Yeah, that's why the ending part was good.
Because I've been there.
We can read the rest, right? We can read the other stuff. It's the strategies and don't do this, maybe do this.
No, that was one of the things that when we were talking about this workshop, the strategy piece and sort of piecing these things together and knowing when to pull the trigger on certain actions.
He forced me to do that.
Yeah. But even NDAs aren't enforceable overseas, though, right?
That's actually not true.
Okay.
I don't know who started this myth, especially in China. I've seen very successful lawyers advising people saying that NDAs are not enforceable in China. So who told you that?
Okay.
Actually, trade secrets is a very effective mechanism. Now, again, devil is in the details. If you do the right steps to protect yourself, including make sure that you label what is trade secret in writing, and such that you can actually present in court. And you have NDA, and guess what? The most ridiculous but actually very effective mechanism is that when people sign NDA, you make a reference to the specific trade secret information, attach it as an attachment. So now they cannot escape. You go to court, you're saying this guy signed this NDA in reference to this particular document. And that's in China, and in fact, outside of US, they don't have so-called a discovery procedure. So everything stands or falls based on the strength of the evidence submitted at the beginning of the lawsuit. Here in the US, we get to be a little bit relaxed or a little bit sloppy. We can say that I suspect they stole my secret, but I don't have to show the court any proof. I'll wait for this pre-trial period called discovery procedure, and I demand that they submit to court and to me all the email messages related to this thing. So you can actually force a lot of things, but not outside the US. So a lot of the US attorneys are not used to that. So they sometimes have certain opinions that certainly by US practice standard, it will be very hard to enforce. But if you know what you're doing in those foreign jurisdictions, sometimes it could be amazingly easy and cheap.
Just one question that maybe will help other people too, but I'm in the process of actually trying to not only figure out my strategy, but select a law firm. Are there sort of, you just sort of get feelings about, sort of particular groups or whatnot, but are there particular questions that you would advise like a lay person to ask an attorney that basically would be a good way to make, a judgment on the quality of the firm or the lawyer?
It's very challenging. From my personal experience, I think I usually go by other people's references. For instance, you know, the Stanford Business School alumni belonging to the Alumni Association. We have a online tool. A lot of times people will post on, I'm a startup, I need, you know, any advice. People will actually tell them that I have used, when I did such and such startup, I have used this particular lawyer or law firm. This is what makes them different. You know, so, and it's those things that would really cause you to say, yeah, they're very attentive to details. They're service oriented, even though you are a small deal. So for instance, you want to know what's their typical client and the mix of their client, large corporation, medium corporation, or small startups like you. And could you talk to some of their previous clients? You know, referenceable clients, those are really important stuff. And otherwise, you know, you could, in terms of, for instance, for patent application specifically, you need to know what is their specialty, because patent applications really depend on their expertise in the technical area. A good patent lawyer will never try to take on a case in which they don't really understand that. Yeah, so even a medium patent law firm will have so many lawyers covering a wide spectrum of technology. They will not get themselves into the ridiculous situation where they have to develop a patent application where they don't even understand the technology. But I tell you, people have tried.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, David.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Super informative.
Yeah.
And Rachel, thanks also so much
Yeah.
for sticking around.
Thank you.
Letting us
Yeah.
get the space.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, you guys, thanks for sticking around so late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been really awesome. Conversation.
The gold
Anyways.
nuggets was at the end.
Yeah. So you stuck around for the
Yeah, I'm
part.
like,
Yeah.
it's coming,
Good.
it's
Yeah.
coming.
There's a bunch of food and coffee and stuff. So if you guys are interested in taking some of it, that would be awesome. I don't have to take all the macaroons home. But yeah, no. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, you bet. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it, thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah,
very much fun.
thank you so
Yeah,
much.
definitely have to discussion. Sure, we have a bunch of these. You're welcome to join.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, and you know, obviously, each company is a little bit different, but there are some things that, you know, hopefully, whenever you ask a question.
Yeah, translation is.
Yeah, no, but
Potentially
it's
better.
smart. I mean, because
if
all these
they
things are
only
very
use
usually applicable to a variety of different industries.
Right.
For instance, song, the lyrics, or movie script, even translation, that technically should require approval from each film. Should be. But there are services available to help you negotiate in any business. Basically, there are agents who actually try to approach the different type of owners. There will be agents in the movie business that could actually help you reach out to the different title owners and try to negotiate something. Because I mean, typically, for instance, Warner Brothers will probably have their own standard practice in terms of
Kind of like that.
how much money you want.
Go in the corner.
And then it
Yeah, I think I
depends
just
on
need
what kind of languages. If it's a common
6.
language,
Yeah, I'll come back. I got
a
it.
lot won't give it to you. But if it's esoteric, like a Hawaiian native language,
Yes. Or English
no, it's very different. You know, and that may be very, very different.